John 6:37. Omne quod dat mihi pater ad me veniet, et eum qui venit ad me, non eiciam foras. All which the Father gives to me will come to me, and him who comes to me I shall not throw outside or throw out. There's a number of interesting vocabulary and syntactical points to talk about here. This is quite an interesting little verse. As Jesus continues his discourse, all related to his relationship with the Father and his identity, as so often in the Gospel of John, he begins in our Latin translation in a way that's very close to the underlying Greek text. Omne quod pater dat mihi, mihi indicating the indirect object, the person to whom something is given. We almost always find indirect objects in company with the verb dare. Here, dative singular of the first person pronoun, to me. But omne quod really is what's more interesting. Most English translations read all, and I'm not really sure how you could do it better than that, but it's important for us to note all is not a substantive meaning all people, but refers rather to the whole thing, all of that thing which my Father gives to me. So in some abstract sense here, it almost sounds like we're talking about property rather than persons. Though, of course, based on the context, we can see immediately in the following words that we're talking about people, not things. And again, the Greek is precisely the same underneath here. So all which the Father gives to me, his whole grant to me, we might say, maybe that's a good English equivalent, will come, future tense. And one of the things to note in this verse is that future tense there and this future tense here, because they're not terribly obvious. Again, if you've learned Latin only recently, you might have learned to look for the be infix indicating the future tense. And of course, it does perform that function for the first and second conjugations. But for the third and fourth, we're going to find a different form. And here, this, of course, form from the verb venire, fourth conjugation verb, indicates future tense, but it's subtle. There's not much difference between venet and veniet, right? So we've got to notice and pick up on those things. This is something I've admonished you about way too many times. I'm sure you find it tiresome at this point if you've been following these videos for a while, but probably we can't say it too many times. We also should note am as a future first person ending, first person singular ending, I should say, in the third conjugation to which eicio, eicere belongs. This is distinctive enough to notice and remember, but if you're unwary, you might mistake this whole thing for like a, accusative singular first declension noun or something like that. You might be confused if you've forgotten that in the future active indicative of third conjugation verbs, you will find this form. So much for the verbs. Nothing else here really poses a problem. I do want to highlight this relative clause, qui venit ad me. The antecedent, as we call it when we're talking about grammar, is eum. But this is a good time to remind you the relative pronoun, and that's what qui is, has to agree in number and gender with its antecedent, but does not necessarily have to agree in case. And the reason is the pronoun, this is a relative pronoun, but remember, it's still a pronoun. A pronoun replaces a noun, right? The pronoun in the relative clause has its own grammatical function separately within the relative clause. So its case is going to be determined by that function. The only way that you know it goes with its antecedent noun, though, is because of its matching number and gender. So relative pronouns kind of strike this careful balance between pointing you back to the antecedent noun and directing your attention forward, as it were, to the grammar of the subordinate clause, the relative clause itself, which is sort of a separate self-enclosed thing. So that's important to notice here, because you might say, well, why eum or why qui? Why don't these words match in case? Because eum, of course, is accusative singular. And why is eum accusative? Well, because it's the object, the direct object of eikiam. This is a long syllable at the beginning, by the way. So I will not cast, and then out. And we've got to mention, this is a lovely word. Well, we'll come back to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get back to foras. So eikiam eum non, right? I will not throw out or cast out him. And that would be fine as a sentence all unto itself, or as part of this larger sentence all unto itself. But the relative clause gives us further information about eum. And here's the further information. That is, the one, he, who comes to me. Again, we could drop that out and we'd know less about eum, but the sentence would still make sense without it. Now let's talk about foras. This is a fun word. This is originally, as you can tell, an accusative plural in origin, but at some point in Latin it became fossilized as an adverb, as an indeclinable adverb. Now, or semi-indeclinable, we should say, because there's also an ablative version, foris, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're just going to worry about this form in front of us. Foras, literally, I'm not going to throw him, eum, I'm not going to cast him out of doors, outside, into the abroad category, not home, but out into some other place. Foras, again, literally out of doors. So that's a really useful little adverb. It's useful even in conversation, in various different contexts, but it absolutely fits the underlying Greek text here. So it's an idiomatic translation choice by our translator.